All right. Well, it is 2:01, so I am going to say welcome, everyone. My name is Lori Zimmerman, and I am the Director of Professional Learning with the Minnesota Association of School Administrators. And I am super excited to have this joint venture between our MASA members, and I'm just going to call them Friends of Bill. I know that's often used in other circles to mean something very different, but I consider myself a really good friend of Bill Sommers, and we are just really excited to have him bring some different voices to the Minnesota conversation. So, Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our activity today.
Okay. Well, first I want to admit to you that this is Stan Slap's fault that I'm doing these again. I called him for permission to use a story, and he said, "Whatever happened to learning omnivores?" And so it's his fault, and I take it from the Eagles, take it to the limit one more time. So here I am.
Yeah.
And my second thing is I am wearing Skip Olson's shirt, so I can bring Skip in, who has passed away since our learning omnivores. We're here today to re-energize school leaders to try to help build those creative cultures of learning. Since COVID and increase in demands, we're short on money, short on time, everything else. And you think about John Murrow said years ago, 80% of people go into education because they want to make a difference. About 4 or 5 years ago, when Learning Omnivores went to San Francisco and worked with Stan, it was an overwhelming success. And his two books, Bury My Heart in Conference Room B, that were referred to me by Rich Sheridan from Menlo. I said, I got to read that. And I will tell you, buy the book and read the lessons from Florence Taylor. It is just a tremendous about vision and values, etc. And I love this about his book. Stan said, "Let the walls come down. Don't lead from your head. Lead from you, from being a human." And his second book, Under the Hood, he started getting into, you have the culture. The culture lives under the rug. So what's under there? And a couple of things that I picked up that I just want to introduce it. If you're going to change the culture or improve the culture, you got to figure out where the choice points are, because you're always going to be faced with choices. But he also said you got to figure out where the choke points are. And I said, who's standing on the hose? And when sometimes somebody's standing on the hose, you either got to move the hose or move them off the hose. So lessons learned to reunite the learning omnivores, and a partnership with MASA, Restorative Self Practices. I am so honored to introduce and learn with Stan Slap. So take it away, Stan.
All right. Something that may seem tangential for initially, but I really don't think it is. It's 5 years ago, 6 years ago, my company was asked to redo the brand strategy for a very large multi-billion-dollar generic pharmaceutical company. And so, which is kind of weird to create a brand for a company that has no name and has never invented anything, but okay. As part of that, we did a lot of interviews, psychographic interviews, attitude, values, and beliefs with their customers around the world. So their customers are a pharmaceutical company. Their customers are physicians. Their customers are hospitals. Their customers are sometimes nurses. Their customers are large buying groups. And the very first interview that we did with anybody, and we interviewed them on 2 continents and 3 countries, we picked up something that I can only describe it as terrified. The person we were talking to was terrified. That was their natural state, their regular state of being terrified. And it was so unusual and so pronounced that we started the subsequent interviews looking for that same thing. And we found it in 100% of the interviews across multiple continents, multiple countries, and multiple positions, that the state of healthcare practitioners that we talked to was that they were terrified. And they were terrified because it is become so increasingly difficult to do that job. So if you go in and see a doctor and the doctor says, you know, I'm afraid you're going to need surgery, and opens in a calendar and says, let's look at this time next month, you'd probably say, well, it couldn't be that serious. He's not saying, listen, go move your car from short-term parking to long-term parking and come right back. But the reality is, the reason that they would often say that is they simply can't get the drugs to operate. And it is such a crisis. Now, there's no bad actors between the insurance companies and the FDA and concerns about opiates and this and that. They're not nobody's trying to do harm. But when they come together, they create an ecosystem that's almost impossible to navigate. And the reason that everybody, 100% of the people we talked to in every one of those positions was terrified is that it is so spiritually, emotionally, not just mentally or physically, but spiritually and emotionally exhausting to do that job, that they felt if they succumb to that exhaustion, people are going to get hurt. People are going to die. And what was terrifying to them is they felt that exhaustion was encroaching on them. And it was just so difficult but they could not flag. They could not stop. They could not stop doing the job right. There was no margin for error. Now, this was before the pandemic. And we've talked to a number of healthcare companies since, and organizations and cultures since. You can imagine what it's like since that time, when their world has been politicized, and the difficulty in doing the job is even more acute. I mentioned this. It's not the slickest opening to a presentation like this, but I mention this because if there's any other industry I would liken to kind of that same fear, it would be the people I'm talking to now. It would be education, and maybe perhaps public education even more than private education. The fear that the system that you must work in, and the conditions and the pressure that you must tolerate to be in your position, whether you are a school administrator, whether you are directly student facing as a teacher, wherever you are in the ecosystem, I would imagine is so exhausting. And no matter how purpose driven you are, so spiritually daunting at times. And there must be an accompanying fear from the people calling in today, but the people that work for you as well, that if we succumb to this exhaustion, what's going to happen to our students? And based upon what's going to happen to our students, what's going to happen to their families, and what's going to happen to the world if this generation of students isn't protected, isn't educated correctly, doesn't learn the right things about how to live, as well as just base education. So if in any way that's accurate, I don't mean to be presumptuous, but the people in public education that I've talked to mirror that same kind of concern, then what's required is creating a culture within your schools of self-restoration and resilience. The school can't be responsible for providing the resilience all by itself. It has to be, or the self-restoration has to be individual, the ability to restore yourself in this tough position. And from self-restoration comes the energy that can be transferred into resilience. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today. Some have had to do that. Now, this is a big subject, creating cultures of self-restoration resilience. We could spend a lifetime talking about how to create a culture of self-restoration resilience. I don't have a lifetime to spend talking to you about how to create a culture of self-restoration resilience. I have 3 hours. So I figured I had a choice. I can make the 3 hours seem like a lifetime to you, or I could focus on what's most important. And so today, I picked some things that I think are most important to a baseline understanding of how to do this. So I'm going to present this to you. I'm going to throw a lot of stuff out there and then answer questions for you. Whatever questions we can't get answered within the scope of this time, I'm happy to take them and answer them after my commitment to Bill and so to you goes beyond these 3 hours. And so let's see what we can do. Now, most of the work we do is in business. We work in 44 countries. I'm talking to you tonight from Lagos, Nigeria. And we've had billions of dollars of impact on profitable companies with the things I'm telling you. So I'm looking at it through a business lens, but it doesn't matter if you're a for-profit or nonprofit organization. You still have the relationship of a culture and the organization it works for, and the relationship between an employee culture and a manager culture and the organization. So if it seems at times I'm referring to business, it's only because that's a framework I'm used to talking about. This works the same all over. I'm in Africa. We got a call from Botswana, the government of Botswana, to redo the entire worker culture of the country because the diamond money is running out, and they're going to have to stack rank against other aggressive countries looking to import revenue opportunities. So it's all culture. Okay. And so that's where I'd like to start, is to talk about culture, because whatever you want to get done in your organization really belongs to your employee culture as the first vote. If your culture wants something to happen, something's going to happen. If your culture doesn't want something to happen, nothing's going to happen. And yet, culture tends to be the most overused, least understood concept, certainly in business, so within organizations. To the point where culture was Merriam-Webster's word of the year a few years ago. And so the implications of that are, according to the most popular dictionary in the entire English language, culture was the most searched for word in the entire English language. Now, we like to say in my company, because creating cultural commitment is all we do, if banana had made word of the year instead, by now organizations would understand what a banana is, and managers would recognize it's not going to peel itself just to feed you. You have to really understand culture. So what I'd like to do first, as a prelude to everything we're going to talk about, is put you in that rarefied environment, and I'm going to talk to you as managers, as executives in your field, put you in that rarefied atmosphere of managers and executives who really understand, who have a solid, accurate working definition of culture. All things are possible if you start with this. So let's talk about culture. And the simplest way that I can think of to explain it to you, not that you couldn't understand a more complex way, but we don't have a lot of time here, is to have you imagine that you lived in the jungle. And as far as you knew, you were the only person who lived in that jungle. Because for all of your years of wandering and hollering, you had never met a single other person who lived in that same jungle. Now, if that was the case, if you were isolated, alone in your environment, what would be your most acute concern? Staying alive, right? Survival. I mean, quality of life, that's great. Quantity of life has to take precedence. So you would be constantly seeking information that would help you survive. You would want to know, as an example, this jungle path, is this path safe? Is there movement in the trees? Is there quicksand around the corner? Can I walk down this path safely? You'd want to know, can I seek shelter in this cave? Or am I going to meet the fiercer, faster animal who already calls it home? You'd want to know, if I stick my head in the water to drink, is something nasty gonna take my head off and take it away? Now, if you were alone in your environment, trying to interpret the signals of your environment, trying to reliably control and anticipate the rules of survival, a great thing that can happen to you is if you finally met somebody else who lived in that same jungle. Because now you have all that you've been able to ascertain about the rules of survival, and all they've been able to ascertain about the rules of survival, and both of you are exponentially safer as a result. Now, the best thing that could happen to you is if you finally met a lot of other people who lived in that same jungle, because now you have all of these sources of information, right? People who share the same environment that you do, and now you can not only pretty much confirm, okay, this is how I survive this jungle, but you can move on to the next urgent concerns. Well, then how do I get rewarded emotionally and avoid punishment? Now, if you have this many people in the same jungle, in the same tribe, somebody's going to want to be chief. You know how that goes. And so a culture happens. It is birthed automatically whenever a group of people share the same living circumstances, same jungle, same tribe, same chief, same school, same management, same direct supervisor. When they all share those same living circumstances and conditions together. And so they naturally band together to share beliefs about the rules of survival and emotional prosperity. What does it take for us to survive all living in the same jungle, in the same tribe, with the same chief? And then once we basically have figured out, okay, we know how to make ourselves safe, then how do we get rewarded emotionally and avoid punishment? Important here in your baseline understanding of culture is that culture is not the beliefs about the way things are around here. That's just the currency of your culture. Your culture is an independent organism living right inside your organization with its own purpose and all the power to make or break any management plan and any manager. It is an organism that obsessively seeks information about the way things are around here, attempts to vet it the best it can, and shares it exclusively amongst itself. So it is, excuse me, an independent organism. Its purpose is to protect itself. It exists to protect itself, but it is not anti-management in any way. It's not naturally anti-change in any way. It's not anti-innovation in any way, but it is most definitely anti-unsafe. And anything your culture interprets as unknown, uncertain, unreliable, untrue, has great threat potential, and it will just detach from it. Understandably, if you understand what a culture is. It exists to protect itself. It is an independent organism existing to protect itself. Now, it will protect the organization. It will do what you want it to do, but only if it can discern a reliable through line between what happens to the organization, what happens to the culture. So not that you are infused with the conceit of a lot of businesses that we gave you the job, so now you come to us. But should you ever make that mistake, it's the other way. You have to go to the culture. The culture has the power. So again, I'm talking about business performance, but it's the same thing. Whatever you need to get done, or whatever metrics you use to judge whether you've gotten that done, a thing to know about the culture is it is powerful. It's actually impossible to overestimate the power that your culture has in your organization. I'm asked all the time, so what's the definition of a great culture? And I think people expect me to say, wow, it's a happy culture. Well, yes, you do not want your employee culture actively unhappy. That would not be good for you. But a great culture is a committed culture. And the commitment of your culture is measurable with any metric you use to protect, transform, deliver your organizational goals. If those things are happening, it's because your culture wants them to happen. Your culture is also self-protective. So again, it will protect the company if it perceives that's the same thing as protecting itself. And that's the only reason that it will do that. Your culture is inclusive. So every employee is automatically and immediately a member of your employee culture, because the culture knows that the more people out there searching for the safe watering hole, the safer it is for everyone. So there's no probationary period for somebody new to join the culture. There's no rope line that you can't get into the culture unless there are certain circumstances. If you join the organization, you are immediately and fully a member of the employee culture. Excuse me. So to be clear, every employee who works for you is a member of the employee culture. Everybody is a member of the employee culture, except you. You are not a member of the employee culture. You are management standing outside the culture trying to sell it something. Now, you're part of this culture. You're part of the management culture of your organization, but you're not part of your employee culture. Don't ever make that mistake. Even if you are friendly with your people, even if you're friends with some of your people, even if you used to be one of your people and got promoted, you're not part of your people's culture. No, you have a very special place in the culture. It's a lonely place, but it's special. You are the chief. You are the chief. Do you want me to give you a minute to kind of wallow around in that? Well, get over it, because chief is not some honorary title bestowed upon you in abject appreciation by a devoted, humble employee culture. It's just short for chief subject of all the stories they tell about you. So don't be getting a swell head about that, or they'll shrink it right down for you. So yes, you are a manager. You are part of the management culture, because the rules of survival and emotional prosperity for managers are distinct from what they are from employees, and the sources of information are distinct. So you operate the same way, but a manager culture is distinct from the general employee culture. A culture is also exclusive. Now, whenever you ask or you want your culture to do something, your culture is going to make a decision about how much of its potential commitment to give to making that happen. It is not going to share that decision with you. Why would it do that? That could only make it vulnerable. So planning on anything happening in your organization without being able to confirm the commitment of your culture is akin to planning any CapEx or OpEx expenses without confirming how much money you have in the bank, what you have coming in, and what your credit line is. It's just blind. But the culture isn't going to naturally reveal this to you. So what you want your culture to do and how you want it done, and even why you want it done, will never be as important as why not. Given the corporate logic and urgency of what you want your culture to do, why would your culture not give its full commitment? And if your culture is not giving its full commitment, it believes that it is not safe and sane to do that. And it believes it's got evidence to prove that to itself. Now, because you're not, I mean, you're certainly operating an organization with budgets and targets and metrics, but as opposed to a traditional business, it's not necessarily that business, but there are behaviors that you want from your culture. Certainly behaviors that will lead to results that you want from your culture. And the thing about a culture is, if you want a culture to adopt a process, like I don't know if you use this in your school districts, but in business, there's a process called Agile, been around for a while. It's just a way of fast failing and support and interchange of ideas. If you want your culture to learn a process like Agile, you have to teach that process to your culture. But if you want Agile behaviors, if you want innovation and accountability and creativity and urgency, or if you want the behaviors that you need, which would include resilience, as an example, those are human behaviors. And your culture is a human organism, rather. It already has those latent behaviors. So trying to teach the culture to give you those, it's just a wasted effort. You have to convince the culture that it's safe and sane to do that. Well, why would a culture think it's not safe and sane to give you its full commitment. Well, culture is hereditary. So your culture, like every culture in every organization, has to believe something is real or it will go insane. So at some point, your culture, like every culture in every organization, put a stake in the ground to say, this is the way things are around here. So it can navigate safely around that. And as soon as that stake went in the ground, your culture developed a lot of the elements of its core belief system. Should we trust management when management talks? When we get recognized for our good performance, does that mean we're safer in some way? When the organization says, here's the plan, we're telling you this today, is that going to be the plan tomorrow? A lot of other elements, fundamental elements of its belief system. Now, your culture didn't try and get it wrong when it put that stake in the ground and decided this is the way things are around here, but it could have. I mean, it only had the data it could accumulate and its ability to interpret it. Doesn't matter. Stake goes in the ground, the belief system is formed. And because a culture is a human organism, like all of us human organisms, once we decide on something, we look for data to confirm our decision, not to contradict it. So even if your culture innocently misinterpreted some happening, some event, some management decision, some reaction or lack of reaction, certainly anything that's happened over the last few years with the pressure of COVID and everything that brought to education, if it misinterpreted anything, it has subsequently looked through the filter to find confirming data. And since it was looking, it probably found what it considers confirming data. And so your culture is hardwired a belief system about whether it's safe and sane to give its full commitment to whatever you want, including staying in the job, period. The reason that I mention this to you is that you don't know when your culture put that stake in the ground. It could have happened yesterday. It could have happened last year. It could have happened 15 years ago. It could have happened before you even took over the team. And when we do cultural analytics for organizations, we find this is often the case. 15, 20 years ago was Genesis, the point of origin for the culture's current belief system, and it has continued to sustain it because it recognizes iconic events that have confirmed to the culture anyway that this is the right thing to do. So it's passed down from one tenured generation to the next as a belief system about the way this is. Now, management likes to look at the culture's belief systems like an Etch-a-Sketch. If you remember that old 60s toy with the plastic screen and the two knobs that etched something in graphite, and if you didn't like your creation, you just shake it and everything's new again. That's not a cultural belief system. Time hardens a culture's belief. It doesn't dilute culture's belief. So your culture is hereditary. And your culture is also neurotic. On a good day, your culture is simply neurotic. On a bad day, it's completely out of its mind. And it's neurotic, its basic state is neurotic because it is trying to reliably control or anticipate the circumstances of its environment when it's pretty much unable to do that. That would drive anybody crazy. Because a culture is neurotic, it's prone to cynicism. It's prone to saying no before it says yes. And if any of you, as I assume we all have, if any of you have ever had maintained an intimate relationship with another human being, you know that you've probably met somebody neurotic. They wouldn't say that about you, but you would say that about them. And you know that if you're trying to deal with somebody's neurosis, loudly repeating your logical point of view probably isn't going to do a lot of good. And that's what happens to a culture. The neurosis is not understood and not respected. The culture is blamed for how it's being treated when it's simply reacting to the signals it's reading. And it's dealt with organizational logic is what's used to treat a culture's neurosis. So that just doesn't work at all. And by the way, speaking of that, there are 3 rules to maintaining a successful, intimate relationship with another human being. Unfortunately, nobody knows what those 3 rules are. Now, this is ultimately good news for you because a culture is rational. You stack all that stuff on one side, your culture is rational. In fact, your culture is the most rational organism possible. Once you understand the culture, its motives are pure and unchanging, and its decision to commit is predictable and correctable. A culture deals in the real. Now, it may be inspired by something you do. It may be massively entertained by something you didn't intend to do, but it deals in the real. It wants to know what's real. And because that's survival information. And so because of that, it is naturally rational. It is a rational, objective organism. It just wants to know what is. That's all. And it's agnostic. Your culture doesn't even mind bad news. It minds whether it can trust who's giving it the news. Now, your culture's antenna is working 24/7, tracking you, seeking information. Its survival concerns are acute because it cannot anticipate or control its environment. So that antenna is tracking you constantly, seeking information. Your culture's credibility detector is nearly infallible. Its perceptions are alarmingly accurate. Its memory is elephantine. You cannot bribe, bluff, or bully an employee culture into sustainably believing or doing anything. You can't tell it what to believe, and you can't stop it from existing. But you can recognize that your culture will give you whatever you want. You just have to give it what it wants first. And respecting what it really wants from you is the difference between its defiance and its compliance. So, as I would say to any business, it's not the responsibility of your culture to understand the organizational logic. All right, or the responsibility of your organization to understand the organizational logic. It's the responsibility of the organization to understand the culture's logic. You get that one thing right, your culture is ready to unleash whatever commitment you need, whatever behaviors you seek, whatever resilience that you want, whatever staying power is necessary for you to keep your teacher base and your other employees in place. Again, it will give you whatever you want as long as you give it what it wants first. So, let me just, it's an open-ended question, and we don't have time right now for a lot of individual answers, but so maybe it's not a question. I hope this is making sense to you. And I hope it is relevant to you and the way you look at culture. Because if you get this, it is truly the key to everything you want to get done in your organization, including during tough times, especially during tough times. So what can you do? What can you do to build a culture of self-restoration resilience? Here's 3 things you can do right now. The first is what we call fill the tanks. Your culture is an organism. And so like any organism, it needs energy to survive. That's the primary feral priority of any organism. Maybe a first priority is energy. But a culture has got an extraordinary need for energy because your culture's entire purpose for existing, again, is to protect itself. And it is constantly seeking information. Your culture never takes a vacation. It never takes any time off. It's open for input and discussion amongst itself all the time. And what it is trying to do is seek information. What is happening? What is not happening? What is being said? What is not being said? What are the implications of this? What's the history of that? It is constantly seeking that information. And it's just taking wholesale information and crunching it to extract hopefully reliable data it can use to update its rules of survival and emotional prosperity. That's its job. That's its entire job. Now, that would be exhausting to your culture if it could just do that laying on the couch, like playing a video game. It can't, because as management, you are forcing your culture off the couch with constant new demands. We've got to get this done. You've got to behave this way. You've got to deal with this. And your culture doesn't want to do that new stuff because it doesn't know what the rules of survival are in that new stuff. So imagine if you're in the jungle and you're being pushed down a jungle road that you've never been down before. You probably don't want to do that. And so your perception of your environment has to be acute. You're looking at everything to check its threat potential, and that is exhausting. Now, like any organism, your culture only has a certain amount of energy. Most of your culture's energy is being used on a regular basis just to survive, however a culture interprets survival. So anything new you want from your culture, you want your culture to do something different, do something more, stop doing this, start doing that, believe this, don't believe that. Any of those things means you have to tap the energy that's left over, which is a thin ozone layer of discretionary energy. And your culture will prioritize that remaining amount of energy to protect itself before it protects your organization and what you want done. And if your culture perceives an environment of heightened anxiety and uncertainty, it will detach, take that remaining energy and hunker down and hold on to it because it doesn't know where it's going to need it to protect itself. And the way this plays out is, as management, if you've ever gathered your culture together, and it could be your manager culture that works for you or your employee culture or everybody, and explain the new plan. And this is where we need to go, and this is who we need to be. You know it's a smart plan because you came up with it. You know you are pretty competent being able to explain said plan. And so you explain this plan to your culture, and your culture just stares at you. If you've ever had that experience as a manager or as an executive, don't make the mistake that your culture doesn't get it. Your culture gets what you're talking about. Culture is easily as smart as management. It gets what you're talking about. What it doesn't get is why it should get up for making it happen. That's a different thing. And if you were asking your culture to put in more energy to anything new you wanted to do or anything more you wanted to do, you got to make sure there's fuel in the tank. Otherwise, you're stepping on the gas and there's nothing there for the culture to give you anymore. So a culture, the best way to look at it is like the culture's got 3 tanks of energy that it draws from. And you want to make sure those tanks are topped off before you're asking the culture to do anything that it's not already doing. So it can give you some energy from the top without risking the primary fuel supply it believes it needs to protect itself. So one is context. Why is this happening? Whatever fresh hell that's coming from management, why? Why is this happening? If your culture can connect why this is happening with something fundamental, principles and values of the organization, or some already stated strategic plan, or some measurement of the business that's really already been established. Okay, there's context. We understand why this is happening. So your culture doesn't need to dispatch any extra energy to keep a nervous eye on the threat potential of the unknown. That fuel will stay in the tank and is available for you. The problem is that an employee culture rarely gets a lot of context for what's happening. They get the new plan. The culture always gets a new plan. Doesn't necessarily get an explanation of what happened to the old plan. So the culture's saying, well, what happened to the old plan? Did the dog eat the old plan? What if we put ourselves out there for the old plan that came and went without coherent explanation? So context is critical to a culture. And as part of context, this is how your culture deals with change. It's so unfair. It happens all the time, but it's so unfair to accuse a culture of being change resistant. A culture is not change resistant. A culture has no problem with change. But what does a culture care about the most? It's survival and emotional prosperity. So maintaining the known rules of survival and emotional prosperity. What does any strategic or organizational change you present to a culture do? It screws with the known rules of survival and emotional prosperity. I used to know my job. Now you're changing that job in some way. I have to relearn my competence. Unsafe. I used to know people that I work with. They used to know me. Now there are changes and reorganizations. I don't have those relationships anymore. Unsafe. Especially in a profitable organization, I used to know what my compensation meant when I got it. And more importantly, if I didn't get it. Now, even if you're saying there's some new incentive program, okay, but I don't know what it means. Unsafe. So again, it's not that your culture hates change. Your culture hates the loss of the known that change represents. And this is magnified. Now, I deal with a lot of executives from some of the biggest companies in the world. And though admittedly, I have to look at those executives and say, did you apply for your job or did you win it somehow? How in the world did you get into this position? But in general, I've been in a lot of executive meetings where you have a bunch of senior managers sitting around and say, well, we don't have a problem with change. Must be why we're senior management. Well, let's face it, change is a whole lot easier to deal with if you invented the damn change yourself. And if that change isn't going to happen until you're ready for it to happen. And when it does happen, you have a bunch of resources to throw at the change to make it happen. But by the time the change hits your culture, it's live. The C-suite clock, in effect, is started before the culture's clock gets started. So your culture is expected to hear about this new thing and embrace it and translate it into action all in about the same 60 seconds. You can't blame your culture for hating this. Your culture is just whistling down the street. When a 10-ton change safe fell from the floor up above, right in front of it, it's going to be very hesitant to continue to go boldly where you need it to go because your culture didn't see this change coming. And so any change, even good change, even practical change, is an uncomfortable reminder of how little control your culture has over its work life. And so when that happens, your culture loses perspective. It believes that anything can change at any time. And it just withdraws completely and holds on to its discretionary energy. And it enters a neurotic state where it's very, very difficult to treat with business logic. So what do you do about this? How do you introduce change to the culture? I'm going to tell you what to do about it. The number one thing to do about it's going to sound so simple. It's like, this is a thing. Yes, it is a thing, and it's a thing that organizations and executives most often fail to do when trying to sell change to a culture. Now, the problem you need to solve if you're selling change to a culture is to snap it out of its neurotic state, because your culture's got all the intellectual and emotional wherewithal to deal with any change at all, as long as it doesn't think that everything is changing. It doesn't know where to put its energy. How many defensive fronts can it open up? So you need to return it to rationality. And the way to do that is when you are explaining what is changing to your culture, you must take the time to explain what isn't changing to your culture. So if you can say, this is new, this is different, we used to do it this way, we're doing it this way now, this used to take this amount of time, it can only take this amount of time, you used to have these resources, you don't have these resources anymore, any of that stuff, okay. But here's who we have always been. Here's who we still are, and here's who we will always be. List everything you can think of that isn't changing. Here's all the big things that are not changing. Here's all the small things that are not changing. Here's all the good things that are not changing. Here's all the really annoying things that are not changing. And exaggerate that. I mean, don't make it up, but just say, you know, if you have a couple of PowerPoint slides with 5 bullet points about this is changing, back it with 50 PowerPoint slides. Let's say, this not changing, this not changing, this not changing, this not changing, this not changing. Whack your culture out of that neurotic state. Restore its perspective. The next fuel tank your culture has is predictability. Now, context is kind of looking backwards to say, why is this happening? What can I connect it to that already existed? Predictability is your culture looking forward to say, well, what's going to happen next? If your culture can understand what's going to happen next in its world, then again, it doesn't have to dispatch any extra energy to check the threat potential of the future. That energy stays in the tank and is available to you for what you need the culture to do. The problem is, like, who in the world can anticipate what the world is going to be like next? You can't. It's impossible. But what you can do is explain to the culture what will happen for sure if certain things take place. Now, this is in even the most uncertain environments. You can gather your culture together and say, all right, let's put on the table, all of us, everything we think is likely and unlikely to happen in the next year. Okay. Well, let's explain what our reaction would be if any of those things happen. And so at least if your culture can't say that it knows what's going to happen, at least it can say it knows what management will do if it does happen. And that is a great way of keeping that energy in the tank for your culture. So have those meetings with your culture. It's not an infinite list. You may think, oh my God, anything could happen. When you really have those conversations, it may be 10 things that could happen, 15 things that could happen. Okay, fine. If that would happen, here's how we would react to it. So confirm what you do if it does happen. And finally, self. The third energy tank is, what does being affiliated with your organization, your school district, what does that say to your culture about itself? And if that affiliation has a positive reinforcement for your culture, then that energy stays in the tank for you. Because really, everybody who works for you, including and all of you, and pretty much everybody, every place in the world who works, has got to constantly answer two questions. From people they don't know, it's, so what do you do? From people who know them the best, it's, so what did you do today? And if the answer to those two constant queries does not reinforce a positive sense of self for your culture, then every time they're asked that, energy is draining from your culture. So I'm gonna tell you a quick story about how I learned one of the most important lessons that I think is very relevant to what you're dealing with now. So pardon me for this story. I'll try and make it as quick as possible, but I just want to put you there when I learned it. Man, maybe I won't tell you this story. That's really lame thing for a speaker to do, but I am concerned about how much time we have. So let me just tell you the bottom line here. It's tough working in schools right now. It's scary, it's exhausting, it's punishing. And you cannot necessarily change those things. You cannot eliminate the misery that your culture is forced to endure just to do its job. A job that should be protected by so many in so many different ways, with so many different resources in a logical world, is really an exhausting, punishing job to do well. I don't have to tell you this. So here's the thing. If you cannot change the misery a culture is forced to endure, glorify its capacity to endure it. There are not a lot of people who could get up every day and do this work and hold to this purpose and hold to these standards when the foundation has shifted over the last couple of years and remains uncertain, and there is so much additional pressure. Most people couldn't do it. Most people would flake. Most people would leave. You are not most people. What it takes to do this job, you have to be tough. You have to be smart. You have to be united. You have to be focused. You have to be passionate. That's what it takes to do this job. So you glorify the capacity to endure the misery. And that is what returns a sense of self to the culture. So again, if you can't change the misery, glorify your culture's capacity to endure the misery. And that, ironically enough, is what returns a sense of self. Yes, we are tough. We are tough. Going back to the medical thing, there are a lot of political and very strange forces that are demonizing the people that work at hospitals and did during COVID. And when we work with hospitals where people are being intimidated that work in the hospitals, we say, really? You want to scare us? We deal with fear for a living, pal. You want to scare us? Scary is somebody on the operating table with their family waiting in the waiting room. Scary. We deal with scary every day. You want to scare us? The line starts all the way down the block. So we are that tough. And so what I'm saying to you is this resilience, glorify the culture's capacity to deal with what it has to deal with and return a sense of self. How you doing here? Do you want to take a break for a little bit, or do you want to keep going for maybe another half hour and then take a break?
Keep going.
All right. There you go. Okay. The next thing is what I'm calling make it a wonderful option, but not optional. Now, Bill mentioned that the first time I spoke to the Learning Omnivores group, it was around something called Bury My Heart at Conference Room B. It was around the issue of gaining emotional commitment from a manager culture and allowing it to ignite an emotional commitment in others. And if you had attended that talk, that's great. I'm going to talk a little bit about it again because it's more important now than it's ever been. And if this is new to you, well, that's great too. Okay. So we need to talk about leadership. Now, I mean real leadership, not the organizational confusion around that subject, but what causes real leadership? Because within this is the source of self-restoration for anybody in your manager culture, and including the people on this call today. So leadership and management are very different things. But when it comes to management, there are 6 words that describe any manager's job in the public sector or the private sector, from executive to entry level. In countries in the US and in Lagos, Nigeria, where I'm calling you from today, there are 6 words that describe the essence of any manager's job, yet those words are never written down. You can look in your hire letter, they're never actually in there, but every manager at every level in every company in every country knows those 6 words. And the 6 words that describe a manager's job are these. If it sucks, suck it up. There's a manager's job in 6 words. And there's an expectation of stoicism on the part of management. Take the organizational line, hold steady, be a rock among swirling seas of uncertainty, and just somehow take this on. Well, that was hard to do even before the last couple of years. But just to continue to suck it up and suck it up and suck it up without any way of feeding yourself means that you're just going to explode. People can't do that. So the answer is not found in management. The answer is found in leadership. And I'm talking about real leadership. Okay. So within the scope of what we're talking about today, I've only got a little bit of time to talk to you about this. So let me take you through a speed run about real leadership and how it feeds the self-restoration capacity of everybody in your manager culture and ultimately everybody in your employee culture. So let's talk about emotional commitment. The thing about leadership is, well, actually, to do this, let me ask and answer some questions on your behalf. We'll do it that way. Okay. So the first question is leadership important? That's probably the primary question. I can tell you, I've done decades of deep work on this subject, pioneered solutions in this subject, presented them around the world in this subject. So this is something there's plenty of stuff I know nothing about. This is something I actually happen to know something about. And I can answer this question for you conclusively. Is leadership important? No. Leadership is absolutely meaningless. I should stop right there. Look at all the time I've saved you.
Mhm.
Leadership is absolutely meaningless. Now, what leadership provides, that's very important. You know, you can go on Amazon.com, you can type in books, subject leadership. You have any idea, just guess at how many titles are available under that subject on Amazon? 1,000, 10,000, 20,000? Now, actually, when I was writing Bury My Heart at Conference Room B, that was 12 years ago, I had a member of our research team actually find this out. Now, this was a decade ago, but leadership books breed like rabbits, so I don't know how many there are now. But back then, there was 274,418 books about leadership. 84% of those books were published in the last 20 years, and 91% of them were about organizational business leadership. You ever wonder where all the incessant babble about leadership in an organization comes from? Why, as a manager or an executive, you're preached at about it, you're screeched at about it, it's a standard you're supposed to hold others to. Where does this thing come from? Why leadership? It comes from the one thing that any organization wants the most from its managers, from people like you, but also the people that report to you: emotional commitment. A manager's emotional commitment, this is yours and the managers who work for you. A manager's emotional commitment is worth more than their intellectual, financial, and physical commitment combined. A manager's emotional commitment is the ultimate trigger for their discretionary effort. A manager's emotional commitment translates into them taking on organizational success like a personal crusade. A manager's emotional commitment is the stuff that solves problems that are unsolvable. It's the stuff that creates energy when all the energy has been dissipated. It's the stuff that ignites emotional commitment in others, like an employee culture. Any legendary organizational success is at the root the result of a bunch of emotionally committed managers who take that hill and plant that flag. Now, and the people on this call are in management positions, so I address this to you too, and the managers that work for you. Any manager in the world can appear fully productive and enthusiastic simply because they are intellectually committed, financially committed, physically committed. But if you've ever witnessed a human being emotionally committed to a cause, working like they're being paid $1 million, they're not being paid a dime, you know the difference is big. And it's that difference an organization wants from its managers. Well, okay. Just because it's big, does it mean it's easy? No. The key neurobiological source of emotional commitment in any human being, this is not me telling you this is your brain telling you this, comes from your ability to live your deepest personal values in a relationship or environment. That's where emotional commitment comes from. So as a manager, that would be your environment at work and the relationship with your organization. Now, manager can be a great job to have. You, your managers, they may be having a great time doing that job. But embedded in any manager's job description is a constant requirement to subordinate or even compromise personal values in favor of organizational priorities. Now, I'm not saying you or your managers are out there committing heinous acts as part of some Faustian bargain, although even if you are, listen up. What I am saying is that what the organization wants done, when it wants it done, and how it wants it done must regularly take precedence over your own deep priorities. That's what it means to be a manager. You serve your organization first. Well, you put a person in a position like that, and they detach to protect themselves because values are interpreted by your brain by the limbic system in your brain as healthy, safe choices for you. And so if your brain feels that you cannot make those healthy, safe choices, the environment is dangerous. And the signal and the neurochemical signal is detached. And yet, if you have to go back to that same environment and operate effectively every day, your brain pre-mixes that neurochemical cocktail, and you are just in a permanent state of detachment. It's hard to tell if you're emotionally detached in some cases. Because you're emotionally detached, there's a party in your head you haven't been invited. But this is most often the case for managers around the world, an unknowing state of emotional detachment. Now, in a bad organization, if any of you have ever worked public sector or private sector in a bad company, managers in bad companies, bad organizations, they know they make the deliberate decision to detach emotionally. Managers in those companies say, I'm going to suit up every day for the detachment factory, leave the best of who I am at home and hope it's still there to recover when I get back. But managers in good organizations, fueled by purpose like public education, managers in those organizations, the emotional detachment for managers in these kinds of organizations is even more dangerous, because at least in a bad organization, managers talk about it. In a good organization, one of service, one of purpose, one that attempts to treat its people well, it's kind of, with all that going on, it's kind of unseemly to complain about what the organization isn't giving you. So in a good organization, it's even more dangerous because it's not talked about. And yet that emotional detachment naturally happens if managers have to compromise in any way or subordinate in any way their personal values, what life has taught them is the best way to live, in favor of any organizational priority. And when that happens, all hope of emotional commitment is lost, and all hope of real leadership is lost as well. So this is going back to real leadership. And you can read those 274,418 books on Amazon.com, and they will all tell you basically the same thing about leadership. That the purpose of leadership in a profitable organization is to increase shareholder productivity, shareholder value, and team productivity. That's not the purpose of leadership. That has never been the purpose of leadership. That will never be the purpose of leadership. Although leadership will do those kinds of things if you apply it in the enterprise. But the irreducible essence of leadership is that leaders are human beings who live their own deepest values without compromise. And they use those values to make life better for other human beings. That's why people become leaders. That's why people follow leaders. There isn't any leadership school in history that can claim history's most iconic leaders as alumni. These people all just started somewhere, figured it out. So the question, of course, is can you and your managers become real leaders? Not leadership by position, not leadership by self-claiming, but real leaders. Oh, hell yes, of course you can. Leadership is not some rare genetic imperative. It's innate in every human being, and it's damn well innate in you. You just have to know where to get started. Now, you study the chronology of any iconic leader in history, their leadership all started in exactly the same place, with their personal values being put under tremendous pressure. You want to know something's important to you? Meet somebody trying to take it away. It's a little harder being a manager today, either in a profitable organization or one that's so purpose-driven, like education. Because your sense of self, by affiliating with the might and magnificence of the organizational purpose, you get compensated for doing what the organization wants you to do. It's just the pressure on your values as a manager today arrives gift wrapped. It's not that easy to tell, but the pressure is there. Let me give you a data point that came out of the Bury My Heart at Conference Room B process, which happened before I wrote the book. Now, we put tens and tens and tens of thousands of managers successfully through this process. But when we hit the first 10,000 benchmark, and we do this to confirm every time we hit another one, so many, many times since, We went back and we looked at some of the data that came out of this Barry Maharda conference and be processed in organizations with manager cultures. And one of the things we ask managers in this process is, well, what are your most important values? I mean, if that's living them at work is the source of your emotional commitment to the organization, what are they? And, you know, there's no better or worse values. It's just, you know, whatever you think they are. We find that most adults don't have a clue about what their personal values are. But through this process, we help them discover that. Now, again, no better or worse values, but the first 10,000 managers, this is confirmed every time we do it. We're talking about executives from executive to entry level, from countries and places from Montana to Mumbai, in many of the world's most admired organizations. So we asked them, what are your top values? And again, no better or worse, but there were two values that were most often chosen to the point where it's almost like a lot of the others weren't even options. Number one value chosen by more managers by far than any other is family.
Wow.
Number two value chosen by more managers than any other by a huge margin is integrity. Now we ask those same managers, so we've repeated this again and again, but this first 10,000. So again, managers from executive to entry level and almost from every continent in the world in different industries from many of the world's most admired organizations. Okay, different question. What are the values you are most under pressure to compromise to do your job successfully? Watch me now, this goes very quickly.
No.
Oh, yes. Yeah, oops. Let's go back to where this was. Yeah, let me go all the way back to this. Yes, most important, family integrity. Most compromised, family integrity. Most important, family integrity. Most compromised, family integrity. You are looking at the equation for emotional detachment in your managers. So the question is, do you have to be born a leader to pull this off? No. Nobody's born a leader. People become leaders by doing the things that leaders do for the reasons that leaders do them. So what separates a real leader from a normal human being? It is that they know who they are as a human being. A leader really knows who they are. A leader knows themselves so well they could put a name on their own core values. Now, most of us, we don't know ourselves quite that well. We may be driven by our most important values. Your managers may be driven. They're grown-ups by their most important values. They may be driven crazy by not meeting their most important values. It doesn't mean they actually know what they are. It doesn't mean they're making daily decisions to protect and promote what's truly most important to them, certainly in a work environment. But leaders are different. They know this about themselves. And because a leader knows exactly who they are, they know exactly where they want to go. And where they want to go is to a place where their values are fully realized. Martin Luther King Jr., as a young man, discovers early on he's got values we can surmise of what? Freedom, spirituality, and equality. So he knows where he wants to go. He wants to go to a place where those values are fully in play. Calls it, I have a dream. The only problem is he, like any other leader, can't make that dream happen all by himself. He has to enroll others. He has to turn his values into a compelling cause for other people. So they'll help him do it. Now, leaders do apparently selfless things for the world. But at heart, they're extraordinarily self-centered, selfish people. They're going to do something mighty for you because they need you to do something mighty for them. If a leader knew who they were, and so they knew where they wanted to go, and they knew how to get there, and they could get there, they would just go. They'd send you a postcard from the promised land. I have a dream. You're not in it, but they need you. And so all these mighty leadership behaviors come from this source, hyper-awareness of what life has taught me is the best way to live, firm commitment that I don't want to do without that in my life, the inability to cause that to happen in my world without the support of others. So I have to turn those values into something of real value and importance for other people. It's the same thing with your managers in your organization. Once they understand their values, they've got to translate those to their employee culture. Now, what would that sound like? I mean, this is not the entire equation, but I'll give you a little bit of what that would sound like. Let's say that you, as the manager yourself, had, like so many managers do, family as a core value. But like a leader, you understood why you had family as a value. It wasn't necessarily the actual people in your family. It was, you understood what those relationships gave you that made it so important as a value to you. And let's say that you decide your family, whether it's your friends, your community, your actual family, what it gave you was an environment of open, honest communication and unconditional support and tough love when you need it. But the belief that if you stumble and fall in some way in your family is going to have the faith that you are going to do better, and they're going to be there and pick you right back up without enduring judgment and wish you the best. And in your family, you are surrounded by people who put your welfare ahead of their own. And they inspire you to do the same thing for them. And there isn't a righteous feeling in the world that can match that. That's why family is so important to you. What would that look like if you're rolling it out to the people who work for you? Again, this is not the entire equation, but just a taste. It would be gather around. Let me tell you what life is going to start looking like in this organization. Number one, you will never again put your job and your family into conflict without giving me the chance to do something about it. Number two, your job, your family will be strangers no more. You're doing good, important work here. As we celebrate that for you, we're going to roll that celebration right out to your family, the people that make it possible for you to get in here every day and do this good work. Now, when something great is going on for you at home, don't think you have to leave it locked up at home. You roll it in here. We'll cheer you on. But God forbid something serious ever goes wrong for you at home. I want you to know you'll have the strength and support of this family during your hard time. Because we're like family here as well. We're together all the time. It's time we started acting like a family. And I mean the best families. This team will have open, honest communication. This team will have unconditional support. When we need it, this team will have tough love. But if you stumble and fall in this team, we will pick you back up, put you back up on your hind legs with the faith that you will learn from it and do better next time. And under pressure, this team will never turn on this team. No, this team will come together to protect this team because that's what families do. And family is very important to me. You think your culture is going to reject a message like your culture's dying for this kind of message, dying for this kind of certainty. So essentially what this is first of all, you have to confirm what your values are and you offer the same thing to your managers. What is it that life has taught you is the best way to live? Some of those lessons can be really harsh, but what have you, whether you're living them or now, what have you learned about living that it's about? Those are your values. Okay. Once you've got that, you got to translate those values into the promise of better working conditions for your culture. Here's what I've learned about adventure, humor, endurance, spirituality, wisdom, learning, family, integrity. This is why I've learned these things are so important. Am I going to do without those things here? No. Am I going to have people I care about do without what I've learned about living? No. So you translate into better life of better the promise of better working conditions for your culture. That means your culture wants you to live this way because it wants to live this way. And the power of your culture to make this happen, leaders don't make their vision happen by themselves. It's the power of others. And then you got to translate this emotional commitment into a new story of performance, whatever you need your culture to do, whatever you need your manager culture to do. Because if you just say, listen, this is a wonderful option for you here. You can live your values here, but it's not optional. Because if you don't live your values here, we can't gain your emotional commitment. And what we want is your emotional commitment.
Damn it, Georgie. That Georgie?
Excuse me? You okay there? Okay, we okay?
I'm sorry, Bob is not on mute. Go ahead.
All right. You don't want to just present a vacation home that's not the house your culture really lives in. You want to say, let's measure your emotional commitment in whatever ways we measure performance in this organization. So you can be convinced this is actually a way to stay safe in this organization too. So use this, use your own increased commitment and the commitment you can foster in your culture to get things done the way you really need to get done. And let's celebrate that performance. So you can do this. So will your employee culture reject this whole concept? Manager saying these are my values and this way. No, your culture will not reject this. Again, your culture is dying for this. Because here's the thing. When you say to your culture, these are my values. Now, I didn't just pick these values yesterday. I learned these values. And I had them before I came here, and I will have them after I leave. What you are doing is saying, I am here. Put yourself in safe orbit around me. I'm now giving you the clue to survival in my world. If you protect these values, you're probably going to be pretty safe here working for me. If you violate these, you're going to have a pretty bad day. But I'm telling you right now, and that's what your culture wants. So also, any management message your culture ever hears from you, no matter how extravagantly it's dressed up, is a message that ends only one way. Equals work harder. That's a management message. A leadership message, a real leadership message is also an equation that ends only one way, equals live better. Now, your culture is not going to work harder unless it is allowed, that will cause it to live better. And the same thing that goes for you and your other managers. This is, you should be a leader. There's lots of reasons your organization would want you to be a leader. And that's fine. You have a responsibility as a manager to protect and promote your organization any way you can. Whatever your organization's vision is, make that happen. And that's why you get a paycheck as a manager. Side by side with that, you have an opportunity as a leader to live your own values, make your own vision happen. Now, not only will jumping on your opportunity as a leader not threaten your job as a manager, it will make your job as a manager happen for you, because your employee culture will not respond to protecting you and what you need to get done as a manager the way they will as a leader. Nobody is going to line up behind you as a manager, except maybe to push you down the stairs. But as a leader, they will be there for you. You stack all the things that managers have gotten people to do throughout history. It's pretty impressive, unless you stack it next to the things that leaders have gotten people to do throughout history. So, almost done with this. Will the school administration reject this flagrant living your own values? No, not if you use it to measure performance. Not if it's not just gilding the lily, but you are actually saying, here is the essential value, the urgent value of an emotionally committed manager culture in this school district. No, that's what the organization wants. So as long as you present it the right way, you got plenty of ability in any organization we've ever seen to do this kind of flagrant thing. So, is leadership important? I'm going to wrap this up and then we'll take a quick break. Is leadership important? I posed this question to you about 15 minutes ago, and through the benefit of my inarguable, really just stunning expertise and experience in this field, I was able to answer this for you once and for all. The answer is no. Well, that's not exactly the most accurate answer if we're really going to look at it. The most accurate answer to is leadership important is yes. Yes, leadership is important. Why is leadership so important? Well, again, it's important to the results you get out of your people and your own commitment. There's all the organizational reasons that leadership is important. But let me give you another one that hits closer to home and will hit closer to home for your managers as well. Because I put this same argument in front of, and my company has, and our facilitators in front of, again, tens and tens and tens and tens of thousands of managers, very smart managers who say, oh, you're talking about my personal values? That's what this whole thing is, living my, don't worry about it. Of course I live my personal values. I'm an adult. In my personal life, yes, I protect and promote my personal values. But I'm also a manager. So in my personal life, yes, I protect and promote my personal values. But when they clamp the helmet down on that hazmat suit every day that says manager across the back, and I go into the organ, well, then I'm all over the organization's values. Well, that's beautiful. That's very inspiring, but really flawed, dangerous logic for any manager. So I can't see you all, so I'm going to kind of ask and answer this question the way, well, certainly in private business, this gets answered this way, but let me just ask you anyway. As managers, how many of you work 40 or more hours a week? If you're like most managers, yeah, those 40 hours come and go very quickly. So how many of you work 45 hours a week more? Most managers say, yeah, I'm probably clocking in at 45 hours a week. How many of you, when you look at all your responsibilities and time, how many of you are working 50 hours a week? I will tell you that most managers around the world, public sector and private sector, say, if I really think about it, week in, week out, month in, month out, quarter in, quarter, and I average it out, yeah, probably working 50 hours a week. Okay. How about travel time? The time that you travel back and forth to work or for work. Now, you're not all days feral road warriors, but as school administrators, I assume you're seeing more than one location. So maybe it's safe to say, like most managers in business, you're spending, let's say, another 10 hours a week traveling back and forth to work, for work. Okay. Now we're at 60 hours a week between work time and travel time. How many hours a week would you say you're thinking about work? Not actually engaged in doing the job, but thinking about the job, obsessing about the job, talking to somebody outside the job about the job, worrying about the job, daydreaming about the job, waking up screaming about the job. Could that be another 15 hours a week? For most managers, it is. Yeah, if they really they're obsessed with it. Yes. So now we're at 75 hours a week. If you're like most managers, you're working 50 if you were going to average it out. You're traveling for work, to back and forth to work, 10, and you're thinking about work, 15. Now I'm going to skip the entire mathematical formula so I can give you a break here. But let me just give you the bottom line. At a combined 75 hours a week between work time, travel time, and think time, each and every manager on this call is spending, on average, more than double your waking hours working than not working. Welcome to your personal life. You think you get these hours back when death sends you the email? All right, if you're like most managers that say, I just delete that email from death without reading it and I will live forever. It does not work like that. This is it. These are the irretrievable hours of your personal life. You are not getting this time back. And to not meet your deepest personal values for over half your waking hours every day, every week, every month, every quarter, every semester, every year is a crime. And what's worse, it's an unnecessary crime. Your organization isn't saying don't bring your personal values to work unless one of your personal values is embezzlement or something that could really challenge an organizational value. There's plenty of, yes, again, you have a responsibility as a manager. Protect and promote your organization's values and its purpose, but you also have this opportunity as a leader. And the bottom line is you'll never really work for your organization. Your managers won't either unless the organization really works for them. And that's just the way it is. So, should you live your values? Yes, of course, you must live your values. Your values are your very own definition. It belongs just to you of what life looks like when you live it exactly the way you want to. More importantly, your values are your very own source of safety and hope and renewal, the ingredients for self-restoration. So yes, of course you should live your values. But should you live your values on the job? Now, this is an excellent question to ask if your attorneys are planning an insanity defense. Of course, you should live your personal values at work. Because if you don't, you're not living them in your life. Of course, you should live your personal values at work. Why should you live your personal values at work? Well, because you're spending all the time at work and you don't get it back. And I tell you what, if what you want from your job and what you want from your life are very different things, you're going to have a hard time achieving either one of those things. Why should you live your deepest personal values at work? Because those 10,000 managers and all the ones that followed who said family and integrity are most important and most compromised did not say family was compromised because I don't have work-life balance. I'm not seeing my family. I'm on the job. They said, we asked them, they said, family is compromised. My deep value of family is compromised because I'm not getting the support and the reinforcement and the purpose from who I work with like I am at home. That's why families. They didn't say integrity was compromised because I'm forced to lie, cheat, and steal to make my number. They said my integrity, my value of integrity is compromised because there's an alarmingly big difference between who I really am and who I am at work. Why should you live your deepest personal values at work? Because work-life balance is not a matter of escaping from work. It's a matter of living the way you want to, whether you're at work or not, because your humanity cannot be self-proclaimed. It's only activated when you provide it to others. Why should you live your deepest personal values at work? Because if you don't know what's true for you, everyone else has unusual influence. Now, I don't want to come before you today as some emotionally evolved guy. That's actually a violation of my parole. I can't do that anymore. The whole situation was taken completely out of context. I mean, why do they wear a uniform if they don't? Anyway, they're different. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying I'm the model of emotional evolution. But I will tell you this. This is your one and only precious life. Somebody is going to decide how it's going to be lived. And that person had better be you. So, is leadership important? Yes, leadership is actually the most important thing you will ever do. Let's take a break for 10 minutes. So why don't we take a little bit of time now to get your thoughts and questions, and I'll answer as many as I can. We'll also post-event. You can submit whatever questions you have or comments, and I'll respond to them. We'll give you information about how to contact me directly, and happy to talk situationally with you about any of the stuff we discussed today. But for now, if there's some questions or thoughts or comments or.
I don't see any in the chat right now. Lori, do you see any?
I have a question.
Oh, okay. Look no further.
Okay. Being in education, we work with people who work with children, of course. And when you say that we have to live our values, and I fully agree with that, I don't think I really became aware of my values until much later in life. I had to get some years behind me in order to know what my values were. And now I also realize that young people, children, grow up and they derive their values from their parents, from their teachers, and from experiences that they have with their friends and elsewhere as they are growing. So there's a gap. In other words, I didn't realize my values as a child, nor even as an adolescent, nor even as a young adult. It wasn't until much later in life. How do we go about speeding up that process so that young people are aware of their values and that they can live by them because they are aware of them, because because they admire them in others?
Wow, what a marvelous, essential question. Uh, my short form answer to you is that the teachers have to create an environment in a classroom where that allows some of those values to be contrarian, because they are going to be individual values,
Absolutely.
and they're not going to just be the look good, look nice values. And there's a difference between morals and values. Morals are the right thing to do. Values are the right thing for you to do. So just because you wouldn't pick integrity as a value doesn't mean you don't have integrity. This is a different, values are a different thing. So certainly role modeling, the teachers talking about the importance of values and as appropriate, how they've learned their own values, and what, situations where that just didn't feel right to them, even if that was a popular thing to do. But how good it feels when you are reinforcing what you've learned. So there's some of that, that kind of modeling and that kind of allowance for exploration. That we find that with adults too. It's great that you finally gained that awareness. Some people never do. I mean, there's the average American, I can tell you that figure, is exposed to over 182,000 commercial messages a year.
Oh, yes.
And the purpose of those messages are to make you feel small, to sell you something to feel bigger for a little while. And anybody who needs anything from you, as a consumer, as a voter, as in any position at all, stands to profit from you now having a strong sense of self. Because again, if you don't know what's true for you, everyone else has unusual influence. So the pressure to not understand your values and to disguise that and cloak, and that's on grown-ups too. But if you start with, teachers need to be able to bring their values to work anyway. They are overt role models of that. The other thing you can do is, I don't mean this to be self-serving, but when I wrote the Bury My Heart at Conference Room B book, it's all about adult people in supervisory positions going through a process to understand their values. And then I put a version of that process in for very young children, and a version of that process in for teenagers. Teenagers is where, that's where your kids are most vulnerable to outside influences and not being able to say at a party or something, no, it's just not for me. And I'm good with that. So to understand what's true for you is especially critical at that juncture, but even for young kids. And so there's a cut down version of the process. And I can tell you, taking my son is now 15 and a half. But when he was a lot younger, we took him through this process and asked him to choose from a list or add to the list to explain what's important to him. And at the start, they'll try and figure out what your values are and just say, yeah, those are my values too. But actually, in that process, there was a lot of individualization, and a lot of surprises on what he actually considered most important. And that opens up a great dialogue into why. Why? I mean, you're 9 years old. What has caused you to feel that way? Without any judgment whatsoever. And again, just because you didn't pick integrity, we're not worried as parents that you're not an honest kid. But it was real interesting to see that thoughtful process when a child is challenged with that. Now, to set that up, and that's in the book too, how do you do that? Well, we have to have values as a family, and those values as a family have to be a combination of my wife's values and my values and where those came from. And then we had to have the conversation with him about where our values really came from and when those values had been tested and how we really knew that these were our values. And we ended up telling him some things that might have even verged on inappropriate, what my wife calls her year of bad choices before I met her. And I'm so jealous. I wish I had been one of your bad choices. It sounds fabulous. But, the things that when you are adrift from who you are. And we had that conversation with him, and he took it in, and he sensed that this was a chance to define himself and express that. And then we committed to, let's make sure all our values. We're not always going to, meet them the same way the organization can't always meet a manager's values. But what we're committing to is that yours won't always be the second priority. And we will listen and respect that the best we can, because that's what this family is all about. So I would say that, to summarize, the conversation has to happen in the classroom. And if some of the values are contrarian, you have to let that conversation go. Let that discovery process go where it's going to go. Teachers have to be encouraged, to put it mildly, to bring their values to work. And that becomes, they can't help it, and talk about that, and talk about that it's not easy standing for something, but this is how I've learned. Because a lot of your teachers' values, like all of us, are going to have happened when they were a child. And they can talk about that. This is the way I grew up. And some of those lessons are really harsh, but this is what I learned. Some of the reasons, the reason a family is so important to me is I grew up without a supportive family. But those are great dialogues to have with kids. Listen, you're educators. I think it's a great dialogue to have with a kid. And I think kids can step up into that dialogue and start thinking about it themselves. So I would encourage your teachers to do that, to discover it on their own, confirm that, and talk about it. I would encourage them to allow children to explore their values and not try and put them in boxes or worry that they didn't pick a list of the right values. And then, again, not to be self-serving, but the Bury My Heart at Conference Room B book, which is a hell of a pithy read, if I do say so myself, that has this process and exactly how to do it as parents, how to have that conversation with your child and what to do about it.
Good, thank you.
Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
And Stan, I know it's in the book. Is there a different process or written for elementary and high school kids?
No, I just did it by age. And,
okay.
My wife is a Jungian analysis. I married a therapist, just for God's sake. Hasn't done anything for me. I would like to point that out.
You got it. Okay.
But
here's another question that came in. What do you say to administrator licensure candidates in a university leadership program who feel helpless to change an existing culture unless they're a principal?
Well, I would say one of the important things to realize about a culture is a culture places a greater priority on proximity than position. And so, the principal or senior executives, school administration may have a good day or a bad day. That's of mild interest to your employee culture. If they work for you and you have a bad day, that's of wild interest to your employee culture, because you most directly influence their survival and emotional prosperity. So you have a lot more power and influence as a manager, regardless of what. You don't need the position. You need the proximity. And again, if you do this with an eye toward proving the metrics of this, then you're talking the organizational language as well. We just didn't do it to make people feel good. We did it because it's a source of emotional commitment. Here's what we have done with emotional commitment. We've got this done faster. We're hewing the line here. Retention recruitment metrics have changed. I mean, whatever it is, the performance of the kids because of it, however you can measure it. So I would say that's probably the secret is
Okay.
you don't have to be. You have to be in a position of direct influence.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
And go for it. Go back
All right.
on.
All right. So let's go back to what? Two. The third thing is to move a culture to a place of self-restoration resilience is you got to write the script the culture reads to itself. And so a little bit of background there. Your culture is never going to trust you in your position as their supervisor as much as it trusts itself. Don't take that personally. You're not part of the culture. You don't have the same primary goal of survival and emotional prosperity. You're not in the loop of the information the culture is filtering and vetting and feeding. So you're not part of the culture. So the culture will trust itself more than it trusts you. And a trusting environment is a safe environment to your culture. So it is key to self-restoration and resilience. The way a culture communicates amongst itself is through legends. Now, legends are stories. They're proof points, stories that represent proof points about what, if it's a good legend, that management said this and did this. If it's a bad legend, management said this but did that. And once something becomes certified as a cultural legend, it has been vetted thoroughly by the culture and it's considered true by everyone in the culture. And this becomes the private database that your culture consults when it decides what to do or what not to do. The legends are what are provided to a new employee, new member of the culture on their first day, or a new member of the manager culture on their first day. Let me tell you a story about what you want to do here, what you never want to do here. And so something becomes a legend again when management is emphatic, or when management says this and then does something that is connected to it. So knowing that and really there will never be a piece of hardware, software, satellite, cellular, AI technology that spreads information thoroughly and as fast and as accurate as a cultural legend. It's a bullet train on the Underground Railway. And a culture legend will remain in place forever unless there is evidence to contrast it and for the culture to replace it with something else. Now, having said that, once you know that that's how a culture works, you can deliberately create cultural legends that speak to the points you are trying to emphasize with your culture, the trust that you're trying to increase. And the way you do that is you first emphatically, even dramatically say what you stand for. And then you do something significant to prove that you mean it. And culture says, okay, you said this, you did that. And what would those things be? You could cut through some red tape so your culture could actually do the job that it was expected to do. You could react with exaggerated enthusiasm when somebody does the right thing. You can hold the line under stress or pressure to compromise what you say is important. You can act a fool for your culture, which only works if you're not actually a fool. But if you were willing to risk your dignity in your response to the culture, all these behaviors that you can do. But the key is first to declare what you stand for in no uncertain terms, and then to do something to prove you mean it. Now, the thing is, you could do a lot of great stuff for your culture and not get any credibility from your culture about it. Let me tell you a private enterprise story very quickly. Years ago, Hilton Hotels called us in. And Joe Berger, who's the CEO of Hilton Hotels, was a guy who understood the general connection between cultural commitment and business performance. So he had instructed his entire executive team to go through every process and policy for Hilton Hotels that the culture was expected to conform to, with one goal: see if you can make it more favorable for the culture. And they dutifully did this, and they came up with a lot of stuff. Let's just say, for the purposes of this, I don't recall how many, but let's just say 20 things, 20 improvements. That would be like I remember there was one, employees just don't get maternity leave. Now they get paternity leave, equivalent to maternity leave. You couldn't show your tattoos if you were guest facing. But now, as long as they didn't say hate you on your knuckles, you were actually allowed to do that. The areas where guests see a hotel is where all the money goes. So they took the employee break rooms, which were the seventh circle of hell, fumigated them, painted them, furnished them as a just. Now they did all these things. They did like 20 things. And the culture, the Hilton culture, looked at these 20 things and said, these are all good things. Every one of these things is better than it was before. We like these things. And because we deal in the real, we understand you want something for these things. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to drag this back to our own cave. We're going to put it on the scales. We're going to check the exchange rates. And we're going to come back with the additional commitment that you got by giving us these 20 things. Now, you want more from us? Give us more things. And what Hilton mistakenly did was create a transactional culture instead of a protective culture. And the difference, the one thing they didn't do, was set context before they did those things. If before they did those things, Joe, as a CEO or his executive team, said, let me tell you the importance of people in this company and how people deserve to be treated. And then they did those same 20 things. Those 20 things would serve as 20 proof points to the culture. Management said this, did this, said this, did this, said this, this. You have 20 things that are consistent with what management proclaims is important and how it acts, then you have a dependable environment, which is safer for the culture, and a culture will protect a safe place. And then the materialism of the things that doesn't even matter. What matters is this connection. They missed the context. So when you think about improving your culture and you think about creating cultural legends deliberately, so your culture reads the script that you wrote for the culture when it's saying, what is the safest thing for us to do? Behave like management wants us to behave. Work like management wants us to work. There is an opportunity here. So the very first thing is you really need unmistakable context. Now, when we work with companies, we urge them to create the executive team to create a manifesto. We're not talking about some light, trite mission statement. We are talking about, don't lock eyes with us about what's most important to us. Okay? This is our crazy dream, that people in this company live this way, and the impact that we have on others is this. This is our we are awestruck, jaw-dropped by the potential of not just what you could do here, but who you could be here. Now, dreams don't come true by themselves. So here's what it's going to take to pull this off. Are we going to be able to pull it off? Yeah, it's who we are. It's who we are. You know, we're reasonable about many things, not this thing. Don't mess with us about what we believe in most. You can't afford the ticket. You can stand up for this. Don't stand back. Don't sit down. If you're going to be here, we're going to do this together. And this is what it's going to mean, because this is who we are. And so this is what we do. Anyway, I'm giving a shoddy version of what's a deeply emotional statement based upon the values of the entire executive team that says, this is what's right with the world that must be protected. This is what's wrong with the world that must be corrected. This is what we've learned about living. And this is what this organization will stand for. Here's what we stand for. And let's put some teeth into this. Here's what we stand against. And then since a culture says, well, what do we do with this? That's really inspiring. What do we do with this? Okay, here's some decision-making guidelines that
Hello.
make whatever decisions that you need to make. Just keep this manifesto in mind. So always do this, never do that. And then even if you make the wrong decision, we'll back your play because you're trying to do it the right way. Step across these simple guidelines and you're messing with the manifesto itself. And we will hold you immediately accountable. So the very first thing I would say is you have to get your culture's attention through some dramatic, emphatic statement, a statement of intention. So the things that you do to support it show this connection. And that's where cultural legends come from. Because one of the things you need to do is interrupt the narrative. Your culture has a story, it tells itself. It's a story of why it's withholding commitment. What you need to do is do something that doesn't fit into that story. So when your culture goes back to the story it always tells itself, no. What does it do with this thing that just happened? This thing does not fit into that story of detachment. You got to interrupt the narrative. And the way you do it is create these cultural legends. So start with what you stand for. Now, you can do this individually with the people that report to you. You can do it organizationally if you choose, but make it emotional, make it real. Don't make it an organizational mission statement. Talk about your crazy dreams. Talk about what you stand against as well as what you stand for. Make it mean something to you so you'll naturally protect it. And then look for opportunities to prove that you mean it. Now, one grand gesture that is legendary isn't going to convince your culture of anything, but it's going to cause awareness to look at all the small things to see if it can find connectivity. And if your culture can find connectivity between what you say and what you do, then what you're doing is inviting the pressure test. And this is critical. Even if you do everything you said you were going to do for your culture, you declare this manifesto, this is who we are, this is what we stand for and stand against, this is what it means to be part of this organization. And then you deliver on everything that you said. Your actions go right back to that manifesto. About 10 to 12 months in, your culture is going to go completely crazy on you and act as if you never did a single thing you promised that you would do. And what's important is to understand is what's happening when you get that reaction from your culture. What it means is your culture has been able to identify a pattern. You've interrupted the narrative, and the culture is actually finding linkage, repeated linkage between what you say is important and what you protect and promote. And so the culture is deciding now, should we increase our commitment? Should we take that risk? Should we trust more? And before it does that, it's going to do its best to pressure test your commitment to see if it's real before it makes itself vulnerable by trusting you more. Now, how many options does a culture have to test management's commitment? Not many. The one it's going to seize on is to pretend to walk away. Go, I don't believe you at all. Because if this wasn't real for you and this didn't come from a real place, you go, okay, we just wasted a year on that culture crap. Let's go back to basics. But if you invite the pressure test and you recognize what's happening because you've done this and created these legends to interrupt the narrative, and you hold firm to what you say is important, on the other side of that test is the real commitment of your culture. So first, you need to get its attention, and you need to be able to create legendary moves where the culture goes, oh my God. And I'll give you an example of a legend that you should definitely not try in your own organization in any way. I'll give you an example. And then once that pattern has been developed and the culture has got its own evidence, it's going to pressure test you and hold firm. On the other side of that is real cultural commitment. So let me give you an example of a cultural legend. And there's many I could give you. I put this one in the Under the Hood book. So if you haven't read the book, it's in there. And if you have read the book, I'll give you a dramatic recitation. This is a true story, verified many times, about Samsung, the company Samsung. Now, if you only know Samsung as like a cell phone manufacturer, you don't really know Samsung. They are 18% of South Korea's GDP, one company. Their construction division has built some of the tallest skyscrapers in New York. Their shipping division builds these huge container ships that go around the world. They're multi-level, just into all sorts of stuff. They're huge. Their cell phones and personal electronics actually is dwarfed by a lot of these other things they do. But this goes all the way back to Chairman Lee. It's the Lee family that created Samsung, and that one generation or the next runs this. So Chairman Lee, it's always a Chairman Lee. This was way back in the day when cell phones were first becoming a thing, and Samsung had created their first ever cell phone. And Chairman Lee, who was a guy who was just berserk about quality, quality was his mantra. Quality. Nobody in the company had any doubt about what the person at the top stood for. Quality. When Samsung manufactured their first cell phones, Chairman Lee took a bunch of these phones and sent them as a Korean New Year's gift to VIPs, key people in the media, friends of his, because having a cell phone then was a big deal. This was way back in the day. And he probably would have gotten a lot of thank you messages from people who got these phones. They would have called him and said thank you. If any of those people could have gotten the phones to work, but the phones didn't work. And by the time Chairman Lee found out that he had shipped defective Samsung merchandise to the media, his closest personal friends, and VIPs of the business, it was many months later. So Chairman Lee, the crazy about quality guy, took a trip to Gummi, which is a town in South Korea, where at the time was the center of Samsung's consumer technology. And if so, at the time they were making computer monitors and computers, and they were making laptops, and they were making cell phones and fax machines like that. Now there were, at the time, 2,000 people approximately that worked in the Gummi factory. This is a true story. 2,000 people approximately that worked in the Gummi factory. And they actually all wore headbands that said quality matters, because that's what Chairman Lee said, quality matters. And one morning, these 2,000 or so people trooped in to go to work, and they were stopped at the door of the factory by security, who pointed them to go around the building to the huge parking lot that was behind the building, where no cars were parked at the time. And they rounded the building, and there, standing in that lot, was Chairman Lee. Now, Chairman Lee, it's a Confucian culture. Chairman Lee is like a deity. He's like a god to his people, kind of like you are to your people, like a god to his people. So they never got to see Chairman Lee. Here was Chairman Lee in the flesh. My God, like literally, my God. Here is Chairman Lee. And Chairman Lee was standing there like this. And behind Chairman Lee, again, a true story, behind Chairman Lee was not a pile, it was a mountain of fax machines and computer terminals and cell phones, a mountain. It was as if somebody had taken the 40,000 pieces of inventory that were in the factory at the time and piled them all up outside. Wait a minute. That is the 40,000 pieces of inventory that were inside when we left work yesterday that is now piled outside. Next to Chairman Lee were 4 guys with sledgehammers. And Chairman Lee didn't say a word. He just went. And to the abject horror, people were fainting, passing out, the horror. Those four guys proceeded in front of the entire culture to smash every single piece of equipment to just dust. And when they had finished, and this took a while, and Chairman Lee hadn't said a word, Chairman Lee reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out one of these malfunctioning cell phones and held it up in front of that entire culture and said, "Fix it or I'll be back." Put the phone back in his pocket. They took him back to the limo and he took off. True story. Now, if you joined Samsung today and it was your first day at Samsung and you said, you met somebody who'd been in the culture for a while and you said, "I'm sorry, listen, I'm new here. I just have one question for you. What's with these goofy Quality Matters headbands that everybody wears? What do you think you're going to hear? Let me tell you a story about something you never want to do in this company." Now, I'm not saying you should do the equivalent of that in your own organization. I'm saying he said what was most important to him, and he did something dramatic to prove that he meant it. The culture picked that up and changed their behavior accordingly. Whatever version, it doesn't have to be that operatic and dramatic, but whatever version you have of that is where you start. So first, you have to have some sort of statement, again, that is emphatic and dramatic of what you stand for in your organization and what you stand against, and what you believe about your people and who they are being even more important than what they do, as important as that is, and that you will not back off. Don't mess with me about what we stand for. Most you can't afford the ticket. Once that's in place, then you do something, and opportunities will present themselves for you to protect the stress and temptation to compromise, for you to reinforce in an exaggerated way when somebody else protects what you said is so important. And when that happens, your culture is going to begin to have context. And you just let that roll for a while and wait for the pressure test. Wait for the culture to just go, I don't believe in any of this. Hold firm. And out of that comes commitment. And what that commitment means is a deepening level of trust. It's your culture saying, this is a safe place. And that is the key to its resilience. That is the additive to its self-restoration. I know these are like big concepts and easy for me to say. But again, not trying to promote the book, okay? But there's more detail about how to do that in the book, or, you just, from what I'm telling you, do that. So to wrap this up, I have three things going forward for you. Those are the three things that you do right now. You fill the tanks. You provide context, you provide predictability, and you provide a sense of self for your culture. The three tanks that your culture stores its energy. So it has enough energy. Those tanks are full before you ask it to do anything that requires energy. So it can give you some of that energy off the top, some discretionary energy to work in a different way for you without risking the basic fuel supply it feels it always needs to have in reserve to protect itself. It uses that energy to look at what's going on, to share information, to check its environment. So first, fill the tanks. Second, make living your values as a manager a wonderful option in your organization, but not optional. Because if you are not living your values, for one thing, that's just not right. You should have to sacrifice that. But also, it means that you are not emotionally committed, because that is a neurobiological source of your emotional commitment. So yes, we're going to be the organization that says, go do that. We're not threatened by that. And what we'll do is, we can't always guarantee that your values won't be subordinated by the organization's values, but we're going to do our best to make those a priority and allow you to protect those. And you do that by saying, we're also going to turn your emotional commitment into a story of business performance, so it's easier to defend. And then You write the script. You create the legends that speak to exactly what you want the culture to do, because once something's become a legend, everybody in the culture believes it's true. And they're told in story form, because the culture knows it needs to gift somebody who hasn't even joined the company yet. Okay, I need to put you in the picture. This is what it was like in the gummy plant that day when Chairman Lee came by. So declare what you stand for dramatically and emphatically. Do something significant to prove you mean it. Right there, the culture is dying to find some connection between what you say and what you do. It's not going to miss that. Now you're doing it for the culture, putting it in a nice, neat package. Just continue to just live what you say is important, and then wait for the pressure test. Those are the three things you can do to create an environment of self-restoration that leads to resilience. How about three things going forward, even beyond what you can do immediately? Well, the first is, I mentioned at the beginning, these are culture, self-restoration, resilience in a chronically uncertain world. These are huge. Leadership, these are huge, huge subjects, and we have a limited amount of time to talk about it. So one of the things is contact me. Like I said, my commitment to Bill and this organization through Bill goes beyond this time together with you. This is my email, stan@slapcompany.com. You can reach out to me directly if you have further questions or situations, and I will, but we really do this work. So I didn't just write books about theories. We really do this work. So I can probably give you a pretty practical, tactical, situational response. Okay. You want to find out more about the work, that's Slap Company. But my email is StanSlap, and the books will help you. Under the Hood is the operating system for a culture. How it decides to protect or reject any management plan. Barry Meyer to Conference Room B is the whole issue of emotional commitment for a manager culture. So there's that. The other thing is to remember that these tough times that you're going through in your profession, they're not going to last forever. Tough times don't last forever. But the story of how you stood up to them will. Now, you're going to be living with that story for a long time. It's time you start writing it so it ends the way you want it to. And I think that the best place to start writing that story, so when your culture looks at how you guided it through these tough times, I think that the first place to look at is by considering the gift of life that we've been given. Look, we've been given this incredible gift of life. How do we repay, any of us, the gift of life? Well, you give back to others who are less fortunate than you. You practice empathy and grace and kindness. You strive to make the world both a better place and not a worse one. You do what you can do. And it is ultimate. You could lose a lot of things during the tough times. You can lose talent, you can lose revenue, you can lose funding, you can lose authority, you can lose your mind, and still survive if you retain your humanity. Because it's your humanity that your culture will respond to, because your culture is the ultimate human organism. Now, for all of us, we're going to be having to answer a question for a long, long time during this time of unprecedented uncertainty and pressure on everything we consider stable and normative. Each of us is going to have to answer a question. And we're going to have to answer that question to our organization, to our customers, whoever the students, the parents of the students. We're going to have to answer that question to our own culture. We're going to have to answer that question to our community. We're going to have to answer that question to our children. And we're going to have to answer the question to our own conscience. The question is going to be, who were you when everything around you was falling apart? And so if you think back, like all of us have, if you think back, because all of us have one person that stands above the rest, to the person who's had the most negative impact on you in your life. Now, that could be somebody in a position of authority. It could be a parent. It could be a teacher. It could be, depending on who you are and your demographic, it could be the police. It could be who knows. But we all have one person who had the most negative impact on us. Now, maybe they didn't even intend to do it. Maybe they didn't even realize they did it. Maybe it was just ships passing in the night. But the negative impact on our sense of self and the directions we took or literal pain, all of us has that person. I think it's important to reflect on who that person was for you and how that made you feel when that kind of impact was delivered your way. Conversely, all of us have one person who's had the most positive impact on us. Now, again, maybe it was somebody in a position of authority and influence, your parents, a priest, a teacher, a preacher, a coach, maybe some sort of role model. Maybe it was somebody who didn't even realize it and didn't even intend it. But for whatever reason, that had a positive impact, a lingering, deep, shaping impact on you. And remember what that felt like, to have another human being deliver that kind of positive impact. And when you think about that, when you think about the person who's had the most negative impact on you in your life, and the person who's had the most positive impact on you in your life, remember that the position you are in to create an environment of safety and emotional reward for your culture. And what that means, when you think about that, especially how noticeable that will be now, you think about the person who's had the most negative impact on you in your life and how that made you feel, and the person who's had the most positive impact on you in your life and how you made that feel. You can be either of those people to your culture. You can remain distant. You can just say, hey, nothing I could do about it. You could just say, this is business. This is an organization guy. You can take whatever position you want, or you can treat this a different way. But either way, you can be either of those people to your people. And so I'll answer any questions for you in the time that we have, but let me leave you with this. Let me leave you with my most important, urgent recommendation to anybody in a management position. As I'm asked all the time, if you could give one recommendation to any manager, you could just tell them one thing, but you could only tell them one thing. What would be your most urgent recommendation to any manager at any level, in any country, in any industry, public sector, private sector? Now, I love it when people turn my life's work into a game show question, but I've had a chance to think about it. So let me leave you with this, and then we'll take whatever questions that we have time for. My most urgent recommendation to you as a manager, for yourself, because it is your life at stake here, this time, the time you're spending at work, your life is happening to you now. These are irretrievable moments of your life. You're not getting this time back. For your family, because the health of your family outside the job depends in large part on the health of your family inside the job. For your culture, because it's not easy working in environments of constant uncertainty and anxiety, with regular reminders of how little control you have over your work life. For someone who you only know as management. For, I would say this to the private enterprise, whatever your version of this is, for your company. Because you may do certain things, you may provide educational services and support for children at various ages, you may be anywhere in that ecosystem. That's what you sell, basically. But that's not who you are. What you are is a human company selling those things. And the pivot point upon which any strategic success rests in any organization, for profit or non-for-profit, is a discretionary effort of its human culture. And finally, for the world, because let's face it, things are very weird out there right now. The world is a scary, uncertain place. And there are a lot of scenarios that call for things getting dramatically better before they make it dramatically worse. So we have every indication that things are going to get even weirder before they get any better. Now, what is it that all of the good people gathered on this call today can possibly do about the conditions that affect the world at large? Not much, except to extend our own humanity to the people that we are closest to, including our culture, the people we see every day. To recognize that a culture's search for safety and meaning in an uncertain world is a reminder that we're all living in that world. We're all searching for that safety and meaning. And treating your culture with empathy and dignity and grace is not simply a job performance tactic. It's a mirror that reflects your own humanity. To recognize that how is the world going to change? It's going to change by one person influencing one group at a time. And for all those reasons, I urge you to be human first and a manager second. Okay, that's all I got, except answers to any questions that we have time for.
That's all you got? My God. Okay, people, if you got a question, put it in the chat so I can relay it to Stan. And let me just say, Stan, thank you so much for doing this. I know it's
Yeah.
11:30 over in Nigeria for you.
That's okay.
The
That's
sun is
okay.
still up here.
Yeah, that's all right.
Oh, gosh. While we're waiting to see if anybody's got a
Well,
question.
here's a question to Janice,
Yeah,
from Janice. What do you say to administrator licensure candidates in a university leadership program who feel helpless? Oh, we actually answered that question. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I want to thank you for that. That's very helpful because I hear stories of overwhelm. I hear stories of principals they can't influence, principals that want to relegate them. And it really has to do with the point you're making about conflicting value systems. And so what do I do? Do I decide to leave, or do I decide to influence even if the value systems aren't compatible? Because I have my family to care for.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
we have those conversations and they tend to get a bit messy.
As they should, Janice, really, as they should. And really, should you stay or should you go? I mean, this is a question that's an individual circumstantial question, but what we tell people in the private sector is you may not ever get a job that's any better than this one or any different. So why don't you stay and take your stand, right? And that's without the noble purpose embedded in the work you do. Why don't you and take your stand right here? And the way to do that is to get the culture on your side. If you get the power of the culture on your side, what you can get done. Now, you may not have as much autonomy as you feel you deserve about what you have to get done, but you probably have a whole lot more control about how you get it done than you think.
Beautiful.
Right?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I personally just like in education, we have to get the human back into what we do for learning and building a culture of learning. And everybody's looking for a silver bullet. There are no silver bullets. The more repertoire you got, the better off you are. So here's some, are you reading the chats?
Yeah, from
Okay.
Benna. Is it Benna?
Benna, yeah.
Yeah. So Art Costa and I wrote about the idea that leadership is a set of behaviors, not a position. Amen. We suggest the habits of mind really describe some very powerful behaviors that also describe what you can do. That's great. That's great. Yes,
Yeah.
it's not a position at all. You're not a leader because, of your position. You don't have followers because you have head count. Leadership is a completely different thing.
Yeah. John,
So,
John,
Yeah,
and yeah,
I got a
go ahead.
question. Hi, Stan. I really enjoyed this session. I've been listening. I'm in the middle of listening to Lisa Feldman Barrett uh, on Adam Grant's podcast on controlling the fact that we have more control over our emotions than we think we do, right? And that coupled with, just with what you said, how you ended right before our 10-minute break earlier, just like, what are your values and how do you let just that whole balance piece, right? And in this time of my career where I'm leading, principal of a building, what are some practical things that I can do or any one of us can do who are just finding that struggle of balance and besides doing a T chart of pros and cons and things like that, which are helpful. How can I make this job more palatable so I don't feel like I'm being tapped?
yeah, yeah. And you are.
Yeah.
You are. Um,
And
every
every you can in any profession there are levels of stress, right? So I'm just like, what are some things that maybe you've found that are like just some things to consider? No, nothing is ever a quick fix, right? But things to consider or strategies to consider. Thank you.
Sure. I go back to some of the things we talked about. First, the meaning that you find out of work has got to be personal before it's professional. Professional are somebody else's standards, and personal is yours. And that same issue of self-restoration, if you can take your values and bring them to work. This is what I have learned about living. I'm not going to do without it in a place I'm spending over half my waking hours. I'm not going to have people I'm close to do without it either. We're going to start there. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to solve everything, but it'll solve a lot of things because, again, that combined power of your culture, I hate to just repeat what I've said before, but that is a primary way of doing it. If you are detached, emotionally detached, if you've had to make the decision, John, as executives, managers, all over the world have to make a decision. How do I be successful and sane at the same time? Since apparently those things are in conflict. The things I'm supposed to do just battle with my notion of foundational values and sanity and the result of that, if somebody has to make that negotiation happen, is you detach emotionally. That's what you do. I mean, you either in a relationship that isn't really working for you in some fundamental ways that is tapping you like this, anybody has a choice in any way. You either leave the relationship, or if you cannot or do not want to leave the relationship, you stay and detach emotionally. That's the only way you can stay in the relationship. So you're still there, but you've left here in some ways. And the pain of doing that, if you're a purpose-driven individual and of service, is excruciating and it's deadening. So the first thing to do is just say, I'm not going to make that compromise. This job can get a lot from me. It's not going to get that because it also jumps the fence and follows me home. I'm not going to compromise and subordinate what I believe in for half my waking hours, pull into the driveway after another enriching day of meetings and just turn it on again. It's going to leak on me. It doesn't deserve that. So the first thing is to have that strong sense of what you really have learned about this, about living. And it is totally relevant at work. Nothing could be more relevant. And John, there'll be all sorts of tests on that. And there'll be times when you just, well, if it was family, you'd say, I promised you that we were going to work this way and live this way. Here, principles I've learned about family. And Now this thing is coming down on us. I tried to push back, even as my job is above my pay grade, and there's some logic for it, I guess. We're being rocked on our way to this better place that I want us to go. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to rock it right back. We will not fold. We will take this hit like a family with open, honest communication and unconditional support. And so I'm not going to fold. We're just going to get tougher. Tough times, tougher team. And I think there are ways you can do that. I also found tactically, this is kind of a weird thing, John, but it's what we call in the height of the pandemic when companies were just being flattened and just like we were successful. Now we're almost out of business. We called it look up, look down, look around. And it was to step outside your own circumstances and look for companies in different industries that were dealing with their version of the pressure that you're under. That somehow, now I'm talking more organizationally than personally, that somehow we're like resolving things. And just to natter on for a minute here, because a little off, you saying I need personal self-restoration, but it all helps. The example of a company we used in the height of the pandemic was called Sweet Farms. Now, Sweet Farms, if you lived in Northern California, it's about 30 miles outside in a little town outside of Northern California. Sweet Farms is a little nonprofit farm whose mission was to rehab abused farm animals, let them live on free range. And so goats and sheep and llamas, there's a whole llama abuse thing that people are not talking about apparently. And they would take these animals and they would heal them and let them live. So hardly an essential business for anybody during the pandemic to support, right? And they were going to just go out of business. And they were going to go out of business. And their charges, these innocent beasts were going to suffer mightily, and they weren't going to. So they created a new offering called Goat to Meeting. And what they would do is, because everybody was on Zoom, they would allow you to rent a farm animal for your next Zoom call. So you're on the call with your team, and there's Bob and Mary and Bill and Bug, and then in one quadrant there's a goat, and it's just a goat. And so you say, okay, we're wrapping up. Anybody have anything? Bob, Mary, no, that. Anybody? Meh. Okay, that's like, and it was just ridiculous. It was ridiculous. Well, when I heard about this and contacted them, again, this was in the midst of the pandemic, existential threat to companies and their mission and their very existence. They had already made their entire number for the year, their revenue forecast. They were so oversubscribed on animals for company Zoom calls that they were reaching out to other nonprofit farms, these small farms across the country, go, so you have any sheep that are like camera ready? That, anybody that understands enterprise revenue or, can just fake it? Okay, we'll hire them. Okay. Now, it's a charming story. What does this mean? And I'm using this as a specific example that we're giving to companies. This is a company who found a business opportunity that would not have existed without the pandemic. They never would have done this if they didn't need to do it. Now, what is it that we can find? So I'm just using a private sector thing. But what I'm saying, John, is part of to restore yourself, to just give yourself energy and hope that, man, things can be different, is don't just look in public education. Don't just look in businesses in different countries and just stuff that would apparently have, and look at those lessons and have your culture do that with you. Because I'll tell you why, and then bring it back and go, what can we learn from this bizarre thing that this falafel stand in Lebanon did? Or these people are so up against it that, because I'll tell you, you can't do that without believing that there's hope. You can't do that process without believing that there's energy there and there's solutions. So I'm just saying, tapped out basically is return to your values. Use those values to declare this is the way we're going to live, protect those values under pressure. That self-restoration and any chance you have to connect what you do, any fight that you win in the name of your values, will restore energy for you. Don't believe that. Don't get so detached that you believe that that's an impossible fight. Because you get the culture on your side, it's not impossible. And then just look up, look down, look around. Look at other people who are tapped in their own professions, small, big, private, public, and have your culture do the same thing. Bring me back examples. And it's amazing, that solution mindset, that, yeah, we can do something. I can send you a little more information about it if you want, if you reach out. That would be off the top, some things that you can do.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Sam.
All right.
Here's a question from Jennifer Kresge. What do you see as the role of integrity? How do we inspire others? She's on a board of education. New members are bringing in their acrimony to the board. And all of a sudden now they're getting into, sounds like they're having more dissension on the board versus where it used to be pretty much everybody together.
Well, that's a multi-part question.
Yeah.
You want to add why are there wars in that too? And we'll just try to wrap the whole thing. I remember you mentioned boards. I've been in a few meetings with Warren Buffett, and one meeting he was asked for what is your profile of an ideal board member? He said Helen Keller. I always thought that was
Helen, I love it.
yeah. Yeah. So the first part of that question, can you repeat that about integrity?
Yeah. Yeah. What do you see as the role of integrity? How do you inspire others to develop integrity?
I think a key to integrity is understanding, unpacking what integrity means. When I look at integrity, it's not simply telling the truth and just the process of acting in integrity. Integrity is self-awareness. Again, it goes right back to what we're talking about. But also, if you live in integrity, when you send a message out to others, they don't necessarily, unless you have a really bad reputation, they don't necessarily know that you're not telling them the truth. So they make decisions based on the information that you're telling them. And those decisions are unsafe because you cause them to be unsafe. And eventually those decisions come around back to you. And your world is unsafe because you've started that process. So integrity means safety, for one thing. Also, integrity means respect. I don't think you can act out of integrity with anybody without basically saying one of two things to them. You're either too stupid to realize you're being lied to, or you don't deserve the truth. And I don't think you can diminish somebody that way without diminishing yourself. So it's respect. And finally, if you can be or create or protect an environment or model an environment that is one of integrity, that people can admit when they make a mistake and safely hold themselves accountable, that's where growth comes from. So when I talk about integrity to people, I'm not talking about integrity and whatever I'm talking about three things: safety, respect, and growth. Now, if you can mount an argument against why those are irrelevant or not important to you or people who are depending on you, then we're now in an insane conversation. But I would say the role for integrity is more important than it's ever been, because the need for safety and respect and growth is more endangered. I mean, those circumstances, so the need for those are more important than they've ever been.
Great. Okay, anybody else for the good of the order?
Bill,
Okay, yeah, Bob.
Art Costa and I are at the very beginning stages of working with a small group to develop what we're calling an efficacy project. And the efficacy project aim is to use things that we have learned from Habits of Mind and coaching, and see if they were the foundation for a school in which the goal was agency and efficacy for every student, and agency and efficacy for every child, every staff member, we would like the opportunity sometime in the future to have a conversation with you about that.
Conversation with Bill or conversation with me?
Oh, to you, yeah.
Oh,
Bill.
yes, of course, of
They
course.
live in California, Stan.
Hey, good. However I can support you, please. Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm honored that you would want to do that. Yes,
Thank
of
you.
course. And good for you for doing that work.
As long as you share it with the rest of us, Bob.
Oh, yes, Bill.
Okay.
Absolutely. Bill,
Any
thank
oth-
you for your leadership on this.
If there are no other questions, and
Yeah.
if there are, my
Well, just let me say, Stan, thank you again so much, not only for your writing, your enthusiasm, but the great work you do, what you've done with us before. You got me out of my chair. So thank you. We're off and running now.
let me leave you with one final message. This is not something I said, but it's something I wish I'd said. So I figure if I say it enough times, eventually it'll be what I've said. So I
Yeah.
have 3 more times. So let me say it one here. It's by this guy, Terry Pratchett, who's this hysterical writer. And he said, give a man fire and he's warm for a day. Set him on fire and he's warm for the rest of his life. So I leave you with that. Okay.
Well, thank you. And one plug that I want to make is bury my heart in conference room B and read the lessons from Florence Taylor. It is worth the book. I'm telling you. Every time I cannot read it without tearing up, but it is about total values. It's just a wonderful story about, I'll come back for you. God, is it very moving. Thank you so much for that.
All right. Great to meet all of
Put
you.
it in the chat, Bill.
Thanks for the time. All
Get
right.
get some sleep, Stan. Thank
Will do.
you.
All right.
Thank
See ya.
you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for joining. Good to see you, Sue.
I'm in Mexico, and I just heard this sound very familiar to me from Vancouver, and it's raining, for God's sakes. Anyway, I'm down on the Pacific coast, and it's just so you know, maybe 30, but it's raining. It's
Yeah,
quite
yeah.
excited to see the rain. Anyway, take care, everybody. Wonderful to see you, Art and Bob and Bill and others. And
Well,
thanks for organizing.
how this whole thing started is I'm going to publish the lessons from Florence Taylor from his book, and I wrote him to get permission because it's going to come out probably in the next few months. And he said, "Whatever happened to your learning omnivores?" I said, "Well, Skip died, and COVID." And he said, "We're waiting for you." Ah,
Thank you.
God.
Awesome. Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And Art, good luck in your book. It sounds absolutely thrilling. I had a meeting on dealing with Indigenous students the other day in our Truth and Reconciliation process in Canada and BC. And one of the things near the end of it, we looked at all the positive things some school districts are doing. And then one person who's been working in the field with Indigenous learners for years said, what do we do with people's mindsets that some of our Indigenous kids can't learn as well as others? So we got into that whole bias aspect of learners. And that issue of humanity came up. And if we can't be human and welcoming to every student and staff member that comes through our doors, what are we doing? So your work and Bob's work that I've been had the privilege of having your skill set and knowledge embedded in me over the last 30 years still comes to fore. You need to know when I think about the strategies, the content, and the habits of mind that we come into a situation with. And I think we've really forgotten about giving people sort of some food for thought. And that question about a person that's had a negative impact and a person that's had a positive impact, And the follow-up question is, what were the circumstances? When you think about a positive impact and you think about the circumstances, if we could do that for every human being that comes through our doors, we might have a better system. So thanks for the work that you've done and that you're continuing to do.
Well, I will tell you, when Stan did the values activity for us in San Francisco, he asked, to us to figure out what our values were. But then he asked this question: how did you get that value? My God, did that just open up all kinds of great conversation. I've used that with a group of principals that I was coaching, and it just set the tone. People were so open, and my God, from my parents, from a coach, from teachers kept coming up. So anyway. All right, well, thank you all for coming. This was
Bill,
great.
how do we get the recording?
As soon as they give it to me, I think Dave is gonna send out the recording to everybody. And
Good.
also, just so
We'll share
everybody
it with you,
knows,
Bill, and then you can share it with everybody.
yeah, and I've got John Saphir on April 30th on
Oh,
his
good.
newest book, 40 Years of Research on Leadership. And John couldn't be with us here, but he's going to be dynamite as well. John is
Love it.
excellent.
April
And
30th?
April 30th, we haven't put the brochure or anything together, but I like this Learning Omnivores with MASA. It opens up more and more people, and especially with John's work on leadership at the board level, at the department, state level, principal level, superintendents, et cetera. So I think John will be, probably a couple hours, but
Perfect.
he'll be fine.
Awesome.
And
Thank
then
you.
next year, I'm just thinking I don't know if Lori and Deb can stay with me, but I'm thinking Rich Sheridan, Joy Inc. A lot that we might. I've talked to Eduardo Persino on.
Yeah, you
uh,
mentioned him
Yeah, the
before.
performance paradox, and he's a mindset devotee. And maybe bring John back to do high expectation teaching, 50 ways to help kids know they're smart. So that might be next year.
I am so glad you're thinking ahead, Bill.
Keeps me alive. Is that snow in the background of your?
There is no snow in the background. That's sunshine on the dust.
Okay. Cool.
Thank you, Bill.
Yep. Thank you, Lori, for
Thank
doing this.
you.
And thank Dave and Deb
I
for
will.
their
Yeah,
great
it's
work.
fabulous, and I am amazed at the stamina of folks. We fluctuated a little bit, but we had 40 people in this session for 3 hours. And poor Stan in the middle of the night, he did way better
Yeah.
than I would.
Well,
So
I would be interested in any feedback you get from them, and what was the biggest hits, and anything they would want to do. But Stan gave everybody his email, so
yeah, yeah.
he always
No,
gets back.
just really powerful conversations.
Great. Thank you, Lori.
All right. Thank
Oh,
you. Have a great night.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Got